Have you ever sat in a crowded room and felt completely invisible? My name is Anna Carter, and for most of my life, family gatherings were a reminder that love could be just out of reach even when it's sitting across the dinner table. I learned to spot the little signs early on, the way my mother's eyes slid past me when she handed out compliments, or how my brother Jake always seemed to get the seat right beside my father, the two of them laughing over jokes I'd never been let in on. Some silences I realized echo louder than words. That morning, sunlight fell in golden lines across the kitchen floor, but the air felt thick, uncertain. My grandfather's funeral had brought everyone home, but grief didn't make us closer, it only sharpened the distance. I watched my mother arrange the silverware with nervous precision, her smile brittle as spun sugar. Relatives I hadn't seen in years whispered in doorways, their glances flickering to me and away again, as if I might vanish if they didn't look too hard. The empty chair at the end of the table, the one that used to belong to Grandpa, sat waiting like a question no one wanted to answer. After the service, we gathered in the living room, sunlight filtering through faded curtains. Jake bounced his leg impatient, while my father reviewed papers with a lawyer I'd never met. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, but she never looked my way. It was strange how you can lose someone and still feel like the one who's missing. My heart pounded a quiet rebellion inside my chest. I tried to hold on to Grandpa's voice, the steady encouragement, the way he called me his curious girl. Without him, the world felt both smaller and colder. Just as I was slipping into the wallpaper, a sharp knock rattled the front door. The lawyer cleared his throat, his voice slicing through the murmurs like a blade. "We'll begin now," he announced, laying out a series of thick envelopes across the coffee table. My parents straightened. Jake leaned forward, eyes gleaming with expectation. For a moment, I wondered if I should have stayed away, if it would be easier not to watch my future sealed up in someone else's handwriting. But something in me refused to retreat, not this time. I sat a little taller, determined to witness, even if I wasn't really seen. He started with the formalities, legal language, and numbers that felt as distant as the clouds outside. Jake received the family truck and a generous fund for his business ideas. My parents were handed the house and its sprawling garden. When my name finally left the lawyer's lips, there was a hush. To Anna Carter, my granddaughter, he paused, pulling out an old battered envelope with my name written in Grandpa's looping hand. My mother's jaw tightened. Jake looked confused, maybe even nervous. I reached for the envelope, my fingers trembling. Suddenly, the world narrowed to this small moment, a secret waiting to be revealed. Inside the envelope was a letter. Grandpa's handwriting danced across the page, warm and familiar. He spoke of the times we spent in his greenhouse, of the way I'd ask about stars and seeds in the same breath. He wrote about legacy, not the kind measured in dollars, but in courage, curiosity, and kindness. And then, almost as an afterthought, he left me something I never expected: his research center, hidden away on the edge of the old Carter property. It was more than a building. It was the echo of every conversation, every lesson, every "I believe in you" I'd ever received from him. For a moment, no one said a word. The air snapped tense with surprise and confusion. My mother's face flushed. Jake's fingers tightened into fists. I wanted to look away, to make myself small, but the words on the page anchored me. Grandpa had seen me even when my own family couldn't. He had left behind a piece of himself, and in doing so, handed me the map to a future I hadn't dared imagine. The empty chair at the table wasn't empty anymore. For the first time, I felt the faintest flicker of hope. That day changed everything. Not because I gained an inheritance, but because I was finally given permission to start my own story. In a family that prized appearances over truth, Grandpa had chosen to see me for who I really was. And as I held that letter to my chest, the pain of being overlooked softened just a little. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to learn what it means to rebuild not just a legacy, but a sense of belonging from the ground up. I wish I could say that discovering Grandpa's letter brought instant relief, but the truth was heavier than I'd expected. That night, after the house had gone quiet and the last cousins had driven away, I found myself replaying old memories like puzzle pieces that never quite fit. For years, I'd wondered why my calls to Grandpa sometimes rang endlessly, or why he never replied to the birthday cards I mailed each spring. At the time, I blamed it on distance, maybe old age, or a bad phone connection. I never imagined there were hands deliberately cutting the threads between us. The next morning, as sunlight poured over faded family photos, I finally allowed myself to look closer. I pulled out my old phone and scrolled through years of unanswered messages, texts sent to Grandpa's number, cheerful updates, holiday greetings, quiet. I miss yous that never received a reply. It was only when I found a torn scrap of paper in Grandpa's desk, with a strange number scrawled in my brother's handwriting, that the truth began to surface. Jake had changed Grandpa's emergency contact and quietly told the family I was too busy, too distant. The realization left me cold. I remembered one autumn afternoon 2 years ago when I'd driven for hours just to surprise Grandpa with a batch of his favorite lemon muffins. Vanessa, my cousin, had answered the door, her smile tight. "No one's home, Anna," she said, barely meeting my eyes. I'd stood on the porch, muffins cooling in my hands, while laughter drifted from the kitchen window. I told myself not to take it personally. Now, standing in Grandpa's empty study, the memory stung in a new way. There's a loneliness that comes not from solitude, but from being carefully edited out of someone's life. For a long time, I thought the answer was to try harder, send more messages, visit more often, prove that I cared. I believed, as so many do, that love could be earned through effort, that if I just did enough, I'd be welcomed in again. But sometimes, no matter how loud you knock, the door stays closed, because someone else is holding it shut. I wish someone had told me sooner that being excluded wasn't a reflection of my worth, but a choice others made to protect their own comfort. It's a lesson I carry with me now, gentle and necessary. Looking back, I realize how common this kind of silence is, even in families that look picture perfect on the outside. A friend once shared how her mother changed her college address behind her back, so graduation invitations wouldn't reach her father. The tools may differ: missed calls, altered emails, forgotten birthdays, but the feeling is universal. The ache of being unseen, unheard, quietly erased. If you felt that ache, please know you're not alone. I learned that even in the most loving families, secrets and protection can become walls, keeping out exactly the people who need to be let in. In the end, it was Grandpa's faith in me that kept my hope alive, even when the evidence pointed elsewhere. He knew somehow that I'd find my way back, not just to the house on Carter Lane, but to the truth about what had happened. As I traced his handwriting one more time, I felt the first crack in the wall of isolation begin to widen. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew the only way forward was through honesty, even if it meant turning old wounds into new beginnings. And so, with a trembling heart, I resolved to seek out the full story, no matter where it might lead. I used to think that the most dramatic moments in life came with raised voices or slammed doors. But when the lawyer read Grandpa's will, the room went utterly still, a hush so deep it seemed to press against my skin. As the legal words flowed, I watched my brother Jake's confidence grow with every item from the family truck to a generous business fund. My parents exchanged small, satisfied smiles as they heard about the house, the sprawling backyard, even the silverware that had traveled through generations. I sat quietly wondering where I fit into this carefully planned puzzle. Then the lawyer paused, his eyes finding mine as he reached for the last battered envelope. "To Anna Carter, my granddaughter." The room shifted. He read Grandpa's letter out loud, each word a small act of courage. "I leave to Anna the Carter Research Center, its grounds equipment, and all associated rights. May her curiosity never be dimmed." My mother's jaw clenched, and Jake looked as if the air had been knocked from his lungs. It wasn't the money or the land they cared about. It was the legacy, the chance to shape something lasting. That was what Grandpa had left me. I could feel a wave of shock radiate across the living room. My father cleared his throat, already calculating how to contest the will. Jake's voice shook as he demanded answers. "Why her?" he asked, as if I'd stolen something he'd worked for his whole life. The truth is, I hadn't expected any of this. I'd spent so many years doubting my place that it was hard to believe anyone would entrust me with so much. Grandpa saw something in me, something the others missed. He believed that the best parts of our family should grow, not just be guarded. It's not uncommon, I later learned, for family inheritances to bring out hidden tensions. I read once about a famous ranch in Montana, where the patriarch shocked everyone by leaving the land to a granddaughter who studied environmental science, instead of to his oldest son. The community was outraged, but over time, that decision helped save thousands of acres of prairie. Grandpa's choice, though personal, was also a message: sometimes the future belongs to those who dream differently. His faith in me was both a gift and a challenge. I had to decide if I could rise to meet it. In that moment, my heart was a storm of gratitude, confusion, and fear. I saw how easily love and resentment can become tangled. Maybe that's why so many families split when a will is read, not because of the money, but because of what it reveals about trust, respect, and the stories we tell ourselves about who matters. The lesson crept in quietly. Legacy isn't just about possessions. It's about the courage to pass on what really matters, even if it's unpopular. Grandpa taught me that real inheritance is the trust you place in someone to do something good. As the meeting ended and the house emptied out, I stood at the window, the research center's address in my hands. I wasn't sure what I'd find: abandoned dreams, dusty tools, or a new beginning waiting to be claimed. What I did know was that I'd never be able to turn back. My family's anger would simmer and the burden of their expectations would linger. But for the first time, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt the tug of possibility, quiet and persistent, leading me toward the next chapter, toward the place Grandpa believed I truly belonged. Standing in the hallway after the reading, I could feel the tension humming in the air, as if the walls themselves knew that something had split wide open. My parents avoided my gaze, pretending to study the pattern on the carpet. Jake paced in circles, trying to hide his anger beneath a thin smile. I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore, not after everything that had come to light. With a shaking voice, I asked them why they had chosen to keep me at a distance, why my efforts were always overlooked. It wasn't just about the will. It was about every birthday, every celebration, every moment I was made to feel invisible. My mother tried to brush it aside, saying, "We thought you were busy. We just didn't want to bother you," but the words rang hollow. I remembered a Thanksgiving 3 years before, when I'd driven through a snowstorm to surprise my family. When I arrived, I found out the dinner had been moved to Jake's new house, and no one had told me. I sat in my car that night, clutching a cold pie and staring at my phone, wondering what I'd done wrong. Sometimes exclusion is quiet and casual, but it leaves wounds that never truly fade. Jake's frustration finally boiled over. He accused me of abandoning the family, of never being there when it mattered. "You left for college and never looked back," he said, his voice thick with resentment. I reminded him of all the times I had tried, of the calls, the letters, the unexpected visits that were met with locked doors or empty rooms. "You changed Grandpa's number," I said quietly, and his cheeks flushed. My father stepped between us, insisting it was all a misunderstanding. But by then the truth was out in the open, refusing to be packed away. It's hard to describe the courage it takes to say, "You hurt me," especially to the people who taught you to be strong. In American families, we're taught to keep the peace, to let things slide for the sake of harmony. But silence can become its own kind of violence. I realized then that my family had been more invested in comfort than in honesty. It's a common story, I think, families turning away from uncomfortable truths because facing them means admitting their own mistakes. But real love, I was starting to see, doesn't avoid pain. It faces it even when it's hard. As the confrontation ended, no one apologized, but no one denied the truth either. We stood in the living room, a little lost, all of us blinking in the harsh light of what had finally been said. I felt raw, exposed, but strangely lighter, as if I'd finally put down a weight I'd carried for too long. The lesson settled over me: speaking up for yourself may not change other people, but it can change you. For the first time, I saw a path forward, not built on someone else's approval, but on my own voice. That evening, as the sun set behind Grandpa's greenhouse, I realized the work of healing would not happen overnight. There were still so many questions, so much grief, but something had shifted. I was done shrinking myself to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. With trembling hands and a hopeful heart, I packed my bag and set out to visit the research center. I didn't know what I would find there, only that it was time to begin again, this time on my own terms. The drive to Grandpa's research center felt both familiar and strange, like returning to a childhood home that had quietly changed while you were away. Every mile brought back flashes of memory: early mornings spent in Grandpa's truck, the smell of coffee, the sound of his patient laughter as I peppered him with questions about plants and stars. Yet this time, the silence in the car was thick with absence. I parked beside the weathered wooden sign that read Carter Research Center and sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, willing myself to step into this new chapter without him by my side. Inside, the air was tinged with dust, and something sweeter, a trace of old jasmine he had planted by the front door. Boxes and notes covered every table, evidence of dreams that had quietly carried on without an audience. I ran my fingers over Grandpa's handwriting on sticky notes, each one a breadcrumb left for me to follow. Try the Westfield for new soil samples. Anna never stopped asking why. The research journals were dog-eared and worn, packed with observations diagrams, and the kind of curiosity that made him the heart of our family. I felt both comforted and unbearably lonely. Grief, I learned, is a quiet companion. It lingers long after the casseroles have been cleared and the condolences stop coming. I spent my first night in the tiny upstairs apartment, wrapped in a patchwork quilt Grandma had sewn, listening to the creaks of the old house settling around me. Sleep was restless, full of dreams of Grandpa's voice, encouraging, never demanding. I woke with a lump in my throat, guilty for all the years I thought I could have done more, could have called more often, could have somehow kept him from slipping away. Regret has a way of coloring even the brightest memories. Yet as morning sunlight spilled through the laboratory windows, I realized that regret is also a sign that we love deeply. I made a small breakfast and wandered outside, taking in the quiet beauty of the overgrown garden, the greenhouse still humming with warmth. I found a faded notebook tucked inside the mailbox, my own name scribbled across the cover in Grandpa's looping hand. Flipping through its pages, I saw sketches from my childhood honeybees, sunflowers, star charts, alongside encouraging notes in the margins. You're more than enough, Anna. Sometimes a few gentle words are all we need to start again. Over the next days, I moved slowly, piecing together the legacy Grandpa left behind. I cataloged seed samples, sorted through unfinished experiments, and read every letter he'd ever sent me. It was overwhelming at times, but it was also grounding, a reminder that starting over doesn't mean erasing what came before. In the quiet moments, I began to understand grief and guilt are not things to get over. They are a part of the soil from which we grow, making us richer, more compassionate, more willing to try again. That realization didn't make the pain disappear, but it gave it purpose. By the end of the week, I felt something in me shift. The research center no longer seemed like a monument to loss, but a space filled with possibility. There were projects to complete, students to inspire, and a community to rebuild. Most importantly, there was a future, one I could shape with my own hands and heart. I knew the road ahead would be hard and uncertain, but I wasn't alone. Grandpa's lessons lived on in every corner, every note, every seed. And as I stood in the doorway, watching the late afternoon sun spill across the fields, I felt the first true flicker of hope since he'd been gone. It was time to reach out, to rebuild, and to let new roots take hold. Rebuilding the Carter Research Center was nothing like the stories I'd read about effortless new beginnings. The first morning, I set out with a notebook and big plans, but was quickly humbled by how much needed fixing. The greenhouse roof leaked, shelves sagged under the weight of forgotten textbooks, and the only working microscope was held together by a twist of copper wire. More daunting still, I had to convince myself that I belonged here, not just as a caretaker of Grandpa's dreams, but as someone with a vision of her own. Every task felt heavier without him beside me for guidance or reassurance. Determined not to let fear paralyze me, I started with what I knew: plants and people. I reached out to 2 old friends from college, Jade and Micah, both young researchers with hearts as stubborn as mine. Jade, a soil scientist from Nebraska, arrived with a box of coffee mugs and a laugh that shook the dust off the rafters. Micah, whose background in sustainable agriculture made him indispensable, brought along his gentle optimism and endless supply of encouraging words. Together, we became a patchwork family, tending test plots by day and eating home-cooked meals under the string lights on the back porch by night. Progress was slow and at times demoralizing. Our first experiment, testing a drought-resistant tomato, ended in disappointment when the seedlings wilted under an unexpected spring frost. The funding we'd hoped for didn't materialize, and I found myself wrestling with paperwork long after midnight, trying to keep the center afloat. I remembered hearing stories of other startups in the community, farmers who'd lost their first harvest, but tried again, teachers who built after-school programs from nothing but hope. Sometimes victory isn't a breakthrough. It's getting up the next morning and planting again even when you're not sure anything will grow. As the weeks passed, small wins began to shine through the setbacks. One afternoon, Jade discovered a wild bee colony nesting in the old compost bin. Their presence meant our fields were healthy, and their pollination would help future experiments thrive. Micah succeeded in restoring a weather sensor using spare parts from the shed, allowing us to track patterns crucial for future crop trials. These little victories didn't make headlines, but they restored our faith in the work and in ourselves. Each step forward was a reminder that legacy isn't built in a day. It's the sum of every stubborn attempt, every lesson learned, every hand held out in friendship. Through the hardest days, I learned that it was okay to ask for help, to admit when I was overwhelmed, and to celebrate the small moments. We started a ritual of sharing the day's best mistake at dinner, laughing at our failures, and finding comfort in each other's persistence. I realized the Carter Research Center didn't have to look like Grandpa's vision to honor him. It just needed to be alive with ideas, mistakes, laughter, and second chances. Legacy is not perfection. It's the courage to keep growing when no one's watching. As summer approached and our fields began to bloom, I felt the pulse of hope return. With Jade and Micah beside me, the center became more than a place to work. It became a place to belong. There were still challenges ahead, more repairs, more rejections, and dreams that sometimes felt too heavy to carry. But we had found our rhythm, and we were no longer alone. That season, for the first time, I truly believed that something beautiful could grow from all that had been broken. With new confidence, I began to imagine ways we could reach even further, planting seeds of change in the lives of others, just as Grandpa had once done for me. As the Carter Research Center slowly found its footing, I felt a new longing grow inside me, a hope to share the gifts I'd received, not just with plants or data charts, but with people who might need a second chance, like I once did. One afternoon, while clearing out an old filing cabinet, I came across a folder labeled Community Ideas. Inside were Grandpa's handwritten notes on workshops for local children, nature walks, hands-on science experiments, lessons about soil and pollinators. His vision wasn't only about research. It was about opening doors for curious minds in a town where opportunities felt scarce. Inspired, I spoke with Jade and Micah about launching a youth program. Together, we designed Little Inventors, a series of free weekend workshops for kids from nearby schools and farms. We set up stations for exploring the creek with magnifying glasses, building simple weather instruments, and planting seeds in recycled pots. The first Saturday, only 4 children showed up, 2 shy sisters from a dairy farm, and a pair of rowdy cousins whose laughter echoed down the halls. I worried it wasn't enough. But by lunchtime, they were racing to collect earthworms and arguing over which seed would sprout first, eyes wide with excitement. Over the next few months, word spread. Our classrooms filled with a patchwork of kids, some who loved science, some who struggled in school, some who simply wanted a safe place to belong. I remember Billy, a quiet boy who always sat in the back, hands stuffed in his pockets. He barely spoke at first, but he never missed a session. One day he brought in a homemade wind vane, fashioned from a soda bottle and coat hangers. When I praised his design, a slow smile crept across his face, the kind that said he'd finally been seen. For him, and so many others, that smile was a breakthrough. The best moments weren't always the loudest victories, but the subtle signs of growth. I watched as a girl who once flinched at public speaking now led a demonstration on soil layers for her classmates. Another student who'd struggled with reading discovered a talent for sketching plant diagrams and proudly displayed them at our end-of-season science fair. These small successes changed the way I measured progress, not by grades or test scores, but by courage gained and joy rekindled. Mentorship, I realized, is less about having all the answers and more about creating space for young people to ask questions and feel brave. Through Little Inventors, the center became a gathering place, not just for research, but for resilience and hope. Parents began volunteering, teachers sent notes of gratitude, and older students returned as helpers, eager to guide the next group of explorers. I learned that when you invest in one child's curiosity, you water the roots of an entire community. That was Grandpa's wisdom all along. Growth is not just what you see in the fields, but what you nurture in each other's hearts. With each Saturday, I felt the original wound of being overlooked begin to heal, replaced by a sense of purpose I'd never known before. The energy from our young inventors was contagious, lighting up the quiet corners of the research center with laughter and possibility. I started to wonder how far this circle of kindness might reach, what new chapters might begin. If we offered a place for forgiveness, not just for children, but maybe even for the adults still learning how to grow. One Saturday afternoon, long after the last little inventors had packed up their projects and gone home, I saw a familiar car parked by the research center's old oak tree. My heart fluttered with nerves as I watched Jake, my brother, step out and walk slowly toward the greenhouse. He looked different, less sure of himself, a little weathered around the edges. For a moment, all the old anger and sadness threatened to spill over, but instead I simply opened the door and invited him in. It's strange how time and distance can soften even the deepest hurts, turning sharpness into something quieter and more manageable. Jake wandered the halls in silence, touching the faded photographs and thumbing through Grandpa's notes. "You've done a lot here," he finally said, his voice unsure. I could tell this visit wasn't about the past or even an apology. Instead, Jake asked if he could see the garden where the kids worked. And as we walked the rows of tomatoes and beans, he listened while I told him about our programs, the setbacks, and the small triumphs that had shaped my days. There was no lecture, no defense, just the tentative first steps toward a new understanding. In the following weeks, Jake started volunteering on Saturdays. At first, he stuck to odd jobs, fixing broken gates, painting picnic tables, quietly helping in the background. But over time, the children drew him out. Billy, our inventive wind vane builder, asked Jake to help design a new science project. And before long, Jake was kneeling in the grass, with a circle of kids showing them how to build sturdy frames for garden beds. I saw a gentler side of my brother emerge, one I hadn't seen since we were children ourselves, building forts from fallen branches on long summer afternoons. Forgiveness is rarely simple, and it doesn't erase the pain of what's come before, but I learned that holding on to anger can become its own prison. With Jake, I set clear boundaries. We talked honestly about the past, but I didn't let old wounds define every moment. Instead, we focused on building something new, one shared project at a time. I came to realize that forgiveness wasn't about excusing what had happened, but about making room for something better to grow. Some days, I still felt cautious, but each act of kindness helped mend the rift little by little. As the seasons turned, our family began to look different. Not the picture-perfect group I once longed for, but a patchwork of second chances, new traditions, and quiet acceptance. Jake never made a grand apology, but his actions spoke louder than any words. The research center became a place where we could meet on neutral ground, neither of us beholden to old expectations. The lesson was simple, but profound sometimes. Forgiveness is an act of courage, a choice to build a future, not shackled to old regrets. One evening, as Jake and I watched the sun dip behind the fields, he asked if he could help organize the next Little Inventors Fair. I smiled, surprised at how natural it felt to say yes. In that moment, I understood that our story wasn't about going back to the way things were, but about moving forward together, however imperfectly. With the research center thriving and new connections blossoming all around me, I began to imagine what it might mean to share this sense of belonging with the wider community. There were more seeds to plant, more hearts to reach, and the next chapter was just beginning. Over time, the Carter Research Center became more than just a project or a healing ground for old family wounds. It blossomed into a living heart for the entire community. News of our youth programs and sustainable farming projects spread, bringing in curious teachers, local farmers, and even journalists, eager to learn how a small town was changing its future one seed at a time. The center buzzed with life, from early morning garden classes to late-night brainstorming sessions. For the first time, I felt truly rooted not only to Grandpa's legacy, but to a larger family made up of neighbors, friends, and hopeful strangers. One day, a letter arrived inviting me to speak at a regional science fair. The thought of stepping onto a stage representing our town was both thrilling and terrifying. With Jake, Jade, and Micah's encouragement, I prepared a talk on the power of small beginnings, sharing stories of kids like Billy, whose wind vane won the fair's top prize, and families who grew their first tomatoes from seeds we'd handed out. The auditorium was packed, and as I spoke, I realized that our success wasn't just in awards or articles, but in the pride shining in the eyes of those who'd once doubted they belonged in science at all. What struck me most was how the center's spirit of inclusion had a ripple effect. A local teacher started a weekly after-school club inspired by our workshops. An elderly farmer offered his old tractor for the kids to restore. Even families who'd once kept their distance found ways to get involved, dropping off seedlings or volunteering for community events. We celebrated every win, big or small, together. I began to see that a true legacy isn't measured in money or property, but in the connections we nurture and the opportunities we help others discover for themselves. Sometimes I'd pause at the entrance to the greenhouse and watch the hustle of activity: Jake laughing with students, Jade explaining soil science, Micah organizing a new composting system. There was a beauty in the messiness, a joy in the shared mistakes and humble triumphs. The research center didn't belong to one person anymore. It belonged to everyone who poured their hope and effort into it. Even on the hardest days when crops failed or budgets were tight, we found ways to keep going. I learned that community, like a garden, is cultivated by many hands and hearts working together. Looking back, I realized that all the struggles, grief, family rifts, setbacks were like layers of soil, each nourishing the growth that followed. Our story had become one of transformation, not just for me or for Jake, but for everyone who walked through our doors. The lesson Grandpa had quietly lived by became clear. The most lasting change happens when you empower others to grow. Our real inheritance was never the land or the lab. It was the chance to share hope and opportunity to help someone else believe in their own worth. With the center thriving and the bonds between us stronger than ever, I began to think about the future with a new sense of excitement. There were more students to inspire, new programs to build, and dreams that now felt possible. I knew the journey wasn't over, but for the first time I was eager for what came next. The research center had given me and so many others a place to start again, and now it was time to pass that gift forward, one open door at a time. Some evenings, as twilight settles over the fields, I find myself drawn to the old wooden bench Grandpa built at the far edge of the property. It's the same spot where he once taught me the names of stars, where I first believed that curiosity could be a compass through even the darkest nights. Sitting there now, I look back on the journey, the loneliness and misunderstandings, the hard conversations, the messy work of rebuilding, and the slow, hopeful healing that grew alongside every seed we planted. All the pain and triumph woven together feels less like an ending and more like the start of something new. Through heartbreak and confusion, I learned that real belonging isn't granted by others, it's grown quietly inside, with every brave choice to keep showing up for yourself and those around you. The Carter Research Center was never just a gift from Grandpa. It was a challenge to become the kind of person who builds community and opens doors for the next in line. Together with friends, neighbors, and family old and new, we turned grief into action, doubt into learning, and brokenness into a mosaic of hope that continues to expand far beyond these fields. Sometimes the biggest changes happen in the smallest moments: a child's first proud invention, a hesitant handshake between siblings, a stranger becoming a friend over a row of newly sprouted beans. All those moments added up create a legacy no one can take away. We don't have to be perfect to start again. We just have to be willing to take the first step, to forgive, to believe in possibility, and to help others find their place at the table. Every story of growth begins with a single act of courage. One seed planted, one word of encouragement spoken, one open door. As I look up at the constellations, I remember Grandpa's gentle wisdom. Write the things they don't understand. One day the world will. If this story has moved you, I hope you'll share your own. Let's keep building this community together. One comment, one story at a time. Subscribe to this channel for more journeys about resilience, forgiveness, and finding home where you least expect it. Your voice matters here, and your story could be the spark that helps someone else begin again. Thank you for joining me beneath these wide starlit skies. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever had to start over or fight to be seen, know you're not alone. There's always room at our table. Don't forget to subscribe. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or experiences, and share this story if it made you feel a little less alone. Because sometimes the greatest legacy we leave isn't what we build, but the hope we pass on, one story at a time.